On today's episode of the Unveiled podcast, it's another solo episode from me where I share with you all about emotional hygiene. I will dig into what this means in the episode and I will explain my analogy. I call it a protocol, but it's an analogy for thinking about how to support your own emotional coherence before stepping into conversations with the loved ones in your life. This episode was inspired by a client of mine who helped me expand on this model that I use myself in my own world during one of our sessions, and I wanted to share it here with you because I think it really helps and it takes the conversation about nonviolent communication to the next level. I've also reshifted the order of our podcast and I've moved our updates to the end of the episode, and there's a really juicy one today, so do stay tuned. But if you're not interested in all of the Unveil and Alethea news, you can click off before the end. All right, with that, enjoy this slightly shorter than normal solo episode with yours truly talking everything emotional hygiene. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unveiled podcast, where today I am once again on my own, although I have a series of epic interviews scheduled coming up. But today I wanted to discuss something that I was actually discussing with a private client of mine at some length during one of our sessions. And she supported me to take what was a small concept of emotional hygiene into a whole analogy, which actually made a hell of a lot of sense and was great. And I'm going to start to explore it with you here today. Now, the reason I want to bring this out into the world is partly because I have a free access, everyone should know how to human better policy. But the other part is that I've been observing more and more the complexities of communication when emotions are involved. And we have recorded an entire podcast on nonviolent communication. And I said in that podcast, it can feel quite clunky. It can feel mechanistic. And it can feel like a system that you have to stop and go, oh my God, I need to communicate in a certain way. And it can also be very supportive, but also not sufficient because there's other charge happening that we cannot neutralize. So just in summary, so you don't have to go back and listen to the nonviolent communication episode if you don't want to, the whole point of nonviolent communication is so that you don't bring to a conversation where you have something that's occurring where a need is not being met or something is happening which is affecting you and you have a request of someone else. Nonviolent communication is designed to take the heat out of conversations. So everything becomes very much self-generated and acknowledging the personal responsibility within the situation. And everything is designed to try and make it not trigger the other person's stuff. It can sometimes be incredibly successful. It can sometimes be the foundation of people's relationships, as in they epically love this process. And so every conversation is had like this. There's something about it for me that feels a little clinical. And to be fair, it may just be the way I was taught it and how I it's kind of American. And I said all of this in the nonviolent communication podcast. It is something that doesn't quite resonate with my brain. And yet I think there's a complication to it because I think we can take charge out of language and not take it out of our system. And the whole nonviolent communication thing breaks down because we are communicating with so much more than our words. And I think this is what I want this podcast to talk about. It's almost how to nonviolent communication with your entire energy system, not just by learning a sentence structure, which makes it make sense and technically takes charge out of the sentences that you're saying, but doesn't support you to take charge out from a physiological perspective. So, with that said, I would like to walk through my emotional hygiene protocols. Now, I say protocols because it makes it sound like I've thought about it and designed an actual protocol. All I have is an analogy, and I'm going to expand on it as I did with my client in our session today, and hopefully then wrap it back around to talk about the kind of nonviolent communication stuff and how to tie these two things together. Now, I adore the sense of emotional hygiene because I think that we can be very leaky as human beings onto other people. And I think there are safe spaces to do that. coaching sessions, certain relationships. And I think there are really tricky places to do that because there's so many agendas at play. And I'm not using an agenda as a loaded word. It just is. Like the reason you communicate with somebody is because you need something, want something, or want to say something. And so there's an agenda already inherent by the fact that you're saying something. So within that, it's like there is always charge. And the reality is that encouraging emotional self-hygiene prior to engagement supports the outcome of the conversation. This is not to say that every conversation you ever have in your life has to be emotionally hygienic. I am a really big advocate for real kind of messiness at times. I think it's necessary, and I think it matters for us as human beings not to have to regulate. And if you want to know more about that, listen to our nervous system regulation podcast. I can't remember which number it was, but we'll probably tag it somewhere, because there's so much within this that is, in essence, it's the reality of all of this is that the beauty of the human experience is that you get to do it all. You get to have the real kind of emotional content and productive conversations. The argument I make is that those two can't happen in the same moment. They can happen in the same conversation because a conversation can be an evolution, but emotional messiness and productive outcome are not usually achieved within the same part of a conversation. And that doesn't mean that you can't definitely span the gamut in a conversation of like emotional distress move to like, this is the outcome. And sometimes I'm a firm believer that it's really important that we do the messy rather than being carefully, beautifully kind of together with our stuff. But it's not always easy to feel into messiness, especially if we're not self-aware. So all of that to say that this is it's a protocol. This is an analogy, which is going to walk you through a different way of contemplating how to navigate your own emotional realms prior to engaging with a conversation. I do not want anyone to listen to this and think that, oh no, I had a really messy emotional conversation with that person then. I did it all wrong. I literally just sent an email to someone pointing out that we can't do things wrong. Like things happen and sometimes we make epic mess that we need to clear up. And it isn't necessarily that we have to go into one or into ourselves or into stress about it. It just is. So that like when I was in school, my teachers always used to say to me, you could just delete the first paragraph of every essay you write. I'm really good at preamble. Like it's a unique skill set. I can preface things forever. Anyway, moving on, my analogy. Okay, so there is a cultish feeling and following for absolute honesty at this moment in time. There is a complete kind of pledge for vulnerability and intimacy that speaks to being absolutely 1000% honest 100% of the time. I am a big believer in honesty. In fact, I have an all honesty, don't lie policy, because I just think it's the right way to do life. But there's a huge difference between telling the truth and saying everything. And I think we miss this. I think we particularly miss this when we talk about vulnerability and vulnerable shares and all of that kind of stuff. It's like there's a massive difference between being open and vulnerable and demonstrating your humanness and your vulnerability and spilling your emotionality and stuff all over everything, including other people. And for all of this discussion today, you can also think about the way you show up on like social media or in group settings. This is not just one-to-one relational stuff. But there is definitely an argument for us pausing a little bit before we start to give our everything to everyone who's in our world, because they don't need all of it. Now, I'm such a paradox because I also have another thing, which is say the whole sentence, which I'll talk about in a second. But they don't need necessarily to understand or experience all of the stuff. So my analogy, and I'm going to give you the analogy and stop like keep giving you teasers. The analogy that I use with my one-to-one clients is that imagine that each person in your life
is a house on a street. The entire street is your street. It's your entire world lives on this street. And every single person or situation or group of people has a house on this street. And every single house on this street has a porch. Sealed porch, door into the porch, but every single house has a porch. And the goal with this thing that's not a protocol, it's just an analogy, is that as you walk up to the door of that person's porch that leads to their house, you step into the porch, and it's in the porch where you sort everything out. And within that porch, you can, this is sticking with the analogy, but everything that I mentioned is emotions. You can sort out the shoes. You can hang up all the coats on the coat rack. You can allow the dogs to shake off all their messy mud. And all of that stuff happens in the porch. And then we leave things in the porch and walk into the house. In this analogy, the porch is the emotional sorting laboratory. It's the place where we get all of the crappy bits off our clothes. We leave the dirty things outside. It's not me demonizing some emotions. It's just the complex process behind the emotionality. We kind of leave in the porch. But we don't have to. Essentially, what we're doing in the porch is deciding what we take from the porch into the house. And the reason I have this whole analogy is because we are very used to, as human beings, careering through our lives, going from one thing to the next without taking those sorting house moments, without taking that interruption in flow as an opportunity to self-reflect. And so we go from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, and we literally move between these things and people. And what we do when we do that is like we don't have a porch in front of anyone's house. In fact, all of the houses become a high-rise block of flats, and all we're doing is traipsing through everyone's home, carrying the previous experience, the previous people, the previous energy into the next. So the reason I explain it like this for clients is because it, A, visually and kind of then internally in the mind's eye, spreads everything out. It spreads everyone out, every connection point in their lives. It elongates, it breathes them apart so that there is literal visual the self-impression of space between individuals, even individuals of the same family, even your own children. It's about identifying that individual. And it's the demonstration that you have a unique relationship with every single person in your life. They may have relationships with one another. You may have relationships as a group. And again, in this analogy, that little group would have a house on the street. So that those two people who have their own house go to another house, and that's the group house. But what I'm encouraging my clients to do with this is to recognize that it is our responsibility as human beings to self-organize in such a way that we have a little bit of clarity prior to just barging in to the next experience. And like I said in my opening preamble, it's not that every time we want to spend 3 hours in the porch doing some organization. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes it's super clear. Sometimes it is a nice day outside and you haven't been in any muddy puddles and you can just walk straight through the porch and into the house. This is why my session got pretty hilarious with my client, because it just kept going in terms of what we were doing in the porch. And sometimes you need to spend longer in the porch. Sometimes, and this is the decision that we get to make, particularly in our close relationships, sometimes there's a day where there's so much content in your emotional being that you leave everything in the porch and you go into the house. And you know there's stuff in the porch. You can even say to the person whose house it is, I'm sorry, I've left some stuff in the porch for now. I'll sort it out and I'll bring it in later. All of this stuff just supports energetically the transition from you being in the flow of your life, you being in one person's orbit and coming into another person's orbit. And I feel very strongly that this is how we can essentially be more of ourselves, because we're taking the time to identify what's there. And so my client was like, well, what am I doing in the porch? And so I was like, well, you're organizing coats. And what I mean by that is establishing what's really there. So many of my clients and myself, this is not me painting myself as a kind of paragon of virtue here at all. We don't stop to truly reflect on what is the content and who is it related to, particularly emotionally. Imagine the times you've come home from work and like leaked all over your partner because somebody at work pissed you off. And how many times have you like been angry with the kids because something was happening elsewhere? How many times have you done something with someone that actually belonged somewhere else and you didn't even realize it? Sometimes we do, sometimes we get it and we can say, I'm so sorry, I'm literally activated by this situation over here and I'm just bringing that into this context. But so many times we don't. And so a lot of my work with clients, especially at the moment, especially since I've been doing all the work that I've been doing this year, is slowing them down. And that is, again, what the porch does. It says there is a whole period of time between you stepping off the street and stepping into someone else's orbit and someone else's home where you get to self-organize and self-reflect and work out what's really there. And what's really there that requires taking into the house. And this is the other thing that I feel about kind of communication in the world that we live in. I'm really open as a person. I'm really open with my friends. I'm really open with my colleagues. People know a lot about me. My clients know a lot about me. If you're a client listening to this, you know I share what I'm going through in my sessions with you. I do that because, one, it humanizes me and makes me seem real. Two, it's an incredibly powerful way to socialize someone into feeling connected. But three, I don't really think that I need to have secrets. But what I don't do with my clients is bring emotion to them. Because the thing about human beings is we are innately compassionate. So if you bring emotion, real emotion, the other human being often feels like they have to hold it. And if you're doing that, there is a bleeding process happening where someone else may feel that they're responsible for your emotionality. And to be super clear, they're not, and that's not what you're saying. But there is a kind of uniqueness about humans where we want to reach out and hold, at least help hold the burden. So the whole porch clearing thing is there to support us to get clear on, what do I need to bring to this person? This is where the nonviolent communication comes in, because if you're just barging into people's houses, but you have your nonviolent communication script, what you are doing, or can be doing, is bringing energetic content, even if your sentences are carefully constructed. And just again, to save you going and listening to the Nonviolent Communication podcast, I'm going to try and remember this formula now, because this is a formula. It's, you state a neutral event. When this happened, not when you did this, not when you let me down. It's when you were late to pick me up, which is stating a fact. You were late. Or when, the dishes were left unwashed. Very neutral fact. Not you didn't do the dishes, but when the dishes were left unwashed, I experienced or felt, and then you name what you were feeling, and in a non-judgmental way. So this is the thing about nonviolent communication. Choosing non-judgment words can be really difficult, because abandoned, rejected, all of those kind of words imply agency on the behalf of the other person, and therefore is essentially a judgment word, because you're basically saying, you did this, you abandoned me, you rejected me. Whereas if you say, I felt upset, or I felt confused, or I felt depressed, all of these things are self-agency words. They are internal states which cannot be attributed to someone else, which again, we're decreasing the blame game and we're taking it all upon ourselves. And then you make a request and you say, in future, could you text me if you're going to be that late, or make yourself a mental note to load the dishes into the dishwasher, or whatever it is. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the essence of nonviolent communication. Now you can understand, if you're saying that with real emotional, energetic content, and yet being neutral with your language, you're essentially triggering the person on a different level. And this can be deeply traumatizing. Sorry. The reason it can be traumatizing is because people have historic experiences where people have lied to them, people have, maybe said one thing and meant another. There's a lot of stuff that we were conditioned as kids. Typically, parents say one thing, but we can feel something else is going on. I mean, I know my parents lied to me about how they were feeling. They thought they were protecting me, but that I'm a very sensitive person. Don't tell me you're fine and not be fine, because I can feel it and it feels incongruent and it makes me feel unsafe. And that's why I come to all of this with the whole kind of nonviolent communication. I think it's a massive problem if people are using it whilst energetically holding anger, holding rage, holding, bitterness, and any of the other kind of negative emotions, because what happens is you're essentially making someone else's nervous system completely confused. You're saying one thing, but you're giving them the vibration of another. And this is why I like the house with the porch, because in the porch, you can understand where your calibration level is. And I have often recommended to clients to walk into their house if the emotional sorting in the porch meant that they still felt really emotionally charged and they wanted to take it into the house. And this is where the whole sentence thing comes in, because I'm a big believer in, I think we try to craft human communication a lot more than we need to. I learned somewhere during my illness that I was losing out because I was trying to give people the end of the story, not the whole chapter. I was trying to give people the kind of, the highlights, the big point and the big turning point, the kind of, I don't know, the message, as opposed to giving them the whole trajectory. So I often recommend to clients, if they're walking into their home, the person's home, they know that they haven't emotionally sorted themselves very well. The whole sentence is, I would really like to try and have a nonviolent communication, like conversation with you, to whomever this is, with you, but I know that I'm really emotionally messy right now. I'm more than happy to tell you what's going on, but I cannot make any promises about how that's going to be delivered, or we can just not talk about it and I will get myself online and we'll talk about it when I'm a bit clearer. There's nothing wrong with saying that to someone. I think sometimes we think that we're going to be rejected. And I think that's it, actually. I think we feel like if we're fully honest and we fully divulge that we're not in a clear state and we're not feeling quite comfortable and we might be messy, someone might leave, or someone might be angry. And I think always, and the more I reflect, actually, I've been doing this, thinking a lot recently about directionality and movements towards and movements away. And I think within the kind of attachment styles model, and again, attachment styles are not what people think. They're formed incredibly early in life. It's not like your first 7 years. This is the first kind of 2 years, less than that sometimes, and in gestation. And then in particular, how you receive nurturing from your parents in those first months. And it really isn't to do with acute or even chronic trauma as such, like that would be defined as trauma. It's literally how love was given. And what tends to happen with with attachment styles that are not secure is that essentially there is some kind of movement away from or towards love. I need to explain that a bit more because I know that was a very vague kind of highlight. In essence, attachment styles, for anyone who's not fully aware of it, are to do with how you relate as an adult based on how you were loved and parented as a child, in particular around things like nurturing and human contact. So especially skin to skin. And the fourth trimester, super important for this. There needs to be so much human contact and repair every time something wasn't done or something was not healthy. So, and there's secure attachment, and these are people who can create healthy relationships in the now. They are feel very safe within human to human, especially romantic and intimate relationships, but also friendships. And they feel kind of secure in the presence of their partner. And when the partner is away for any period of time, they don't feel like bothered. Then we have anxious attachment styles. And these are the people who, a bad word for this is codependent, but it's used often. I like to think of this as people who are grippy, grippy to people who really need people. They need the validation. Essentially, this happens when love was inconsistent or difficult to come by as an infant. And in adult relationships, people can be incredibly dependent, which is where codependency comes from, but incredibly dependent on receiving the affirmations and the just constant, yes, I'm here for you, reassurance from their partner. These are the kind of people who, if you don't text them back, or on WhatsApp, if the ticks don't go blue in a quick enough time, they're like agitated. These are also people who can't really bear to be separated without going in time or location, without going into who else are they looking at? Are they flirting? Are they seeing other people? This is that kind of anxious attachment style. And just for people who are attachment theory advocates, this is a very high level, fully detailed description of all of this stuff. Then we have avoidant attachment styles, which is essentially the polar opposite. Same type of parenting, but the take home from that inconsistent nurturance, inconsistent human contact is, I can't trust love. And that becomes an avoidant pattern where people are the away from. So back to my directionality, the anxious attachment is always going towards, and the avoidant is always moving away. And these literally are the people who don't trust in being in intimate relationships and intimate connection, so always have the pull back and are always kind of one foot out the door. And often anxious and avoidant people end up in a relationship together, and of course you've got one person always walking towards and one person always walking away. So the whole thing is complex. And then we have a disorganized, or it's a kind of a blend of both attachment styles, where there's a bit of a push-pull happening. And I'm not going to go into it because my whole point here was about directionality. And this movement towards or movement away from all gets piled into how we relate to other people. And so when we're having these kinds of conversations, we fear the thing that we fear. So the avoidant person is going to fear that person wanting to fix them and wanting to know everything about what's happening inside them. So they don't tell them exactly what they need. They just say nothing, typically, or they don't go to the house at all. And the person's left there going, why haven't they visited today? Talking in my analogy, not practical. Whereas the anxious attached person is desperately fearing that if they say their reality to the person they are being truthful with, they're going to leave. They are going to see a flaw in the person's makeup and decide that they're not worth it, or whatever. And so when we have all of this patterning happening, and all of this kind of fear of the potential of a movement away from us when we really need the person to be close, or a movement towards us to try and fix when we really want to push people away, it always leads us to not saying the whole truth, not saying the whole of our reality. But the solution isn't to then spill all of our emotionality, reality onto other people. It's to really reflect that we get to own our needs and our boundaries. We get to honor exactly how we need to show up in that moment. And for sure, there are times when the sun is setting and it's late at night and you need to eat. So you actually need to get into the house before you've organized the stuff in the porch. And at that point, you get to say that to whomever you are walking into the home of. And I genuinely, when I'm working with couples, tell them to use this terminology because they both understand it, so they might as well use it. And that's the reality of this. It's like sometimes just having a framework. I don't love frameworks, I don't love models, but I do love them in terms of having a common language to discuss kind of beneath the surface stuff, these sensations of incompleteness or messiness, or I don't really know what I'm feeling right now. We get to say all of that. It's why I like shared languages, shared systems. So the conversations I have with people who are trained in, somatics and I don't know, human design, are very different to the conversations I have with my medical doctors. I'm very lucky in that I have multiple languages that I can converse in. They're all English. I don't have foreign languages, just to be clear. But lexicons, dictionaries of reference points. And so when you've got this common language around an emotional porch, sorry, I'm just laughing at how many of these things I've made up this weekend. It's been an amusing weekend for me. But when you have a common languaging around this concept, you can absolutely use it for those times when sorting didn't happen, you didn't know how to sort it yourself. Because the great thing is, you can go into the house of the person and say, I am really struggling to sort out the porch. Can you come out here and help me? This is just awesome languaging to be able to like have a different kind of conversation. And if you need to collaborate with the emotional sorting process, you get to. If you need to just be out there for a bit, you get to. It's this whole kind of sense of you do not need to use other people to emotionally process. You get to have them assist, and you do not need to have it all together so you never need to have a porch, nor do you need to have it all together and never go be messy. It's just having a different reality around how we handle our emotional stuff. And that's why I call it emotional hygiene. It's not because I'm scrubbing the emotions and wanting them to be sanitary and sterile. It's because we get to sort them in a way that means that we can communicate about how we're feeling from a place of embodied, observant. So what I mean by that is it's a felt sense within you, but you're also that part of your neocortex, which is observing your own reality. And sometimes I feel like the neocortex gets a bad rap. Like it's the one that causes us the problems because we can self-reflect and therefore we like create narratives around our own situation and that we typically generally make up. But the neocortex is phenomenal for self-reflection. It's literally what it's there for. Now we use it to our detriment and we self-reflect negatively and we compare and we do all the things that we do that create additional stuff on top of our felt sense stuff. But the human brain is a phenomenal piece of equipment. It can be used to direct attention. And that directs awareness to things. And so if we're using our brain to self-reflect, to just go, what's really here? That's my favorite sentence to ask myself in the emotional porch. What's really here? Because so much of the time we swim from one place to the next and we like launch into the next thing without going, what's really here? I've actually made a commitment to myself to start arriving at appointments 5 minutes early. So I can literally sit outside in the car and go, okay, what's really here? Because I'm like everyone else. Like I careered into my training like just about on time yesterday. I didn't leave enough time to get to an appointment today. I did for my first one, actually, my 9 a.m. Oh my goodness, I was there 15 minutes early, people. It was so lovely to just go, oh, what's here? What's alive inside me? And I felt it all, and it was great. Did I tell the person that I was meeting that I did that? No, they didn't need to know. But it made it a different meeting because I became really clear on what was present inside me because I had a porch and I sat and I sorted stuff out before I actually went to meet them. All of this to say, having this capacity to self-reflect on what's really alive within us it's like a superpower. I don't know how to explain it in any other way than it's like a superpower because it's really neutral. I wasn't there this morning going, oh, well, I'm feeling these little bit of butterflies. Wow, Victoria, you shouldn't be nervous. It's only this person. Or, oh my goodness, I'm feeling slight dread. I wasn't actually. I was feeling butterflies, but I wasn't feeling dread. Oh my goodness, I'm feeling slight dread. I clearly don't want to be here. It's none of that. It's just, oh, feeling this kind of heaviness in the pit of my stomach. Or, oh, I'm feeling anxious. I feel like, oh, there's an anxiety here. Not anything, not making that mean anything. And the thing with the porch is people's porches are different. Sometimes if it's a real kind of connection of ours, to say our romantic partner, we sit in the porch and we're like, oh, this must mean X, Y, Z. I think it's biologically impossible not to jump to some of those meanings. Maybe for like ascended people who are better than me. But I genuinely think it's really difficult not to have the secondary thought of, I noticed this, oh, it must mean this, or, you know, there's some kind of conclusion to it. And I think it gets harder the more connected we are to the person. I genuinely think it's kind of easy when we're kind of going to a meeting with someone that we're meeting for the 4th time, but we don't really care. I think it's really hard when we really love the person and we find it really easy to jump to a meaning from a sensation. But that doesn't mean that you need to trust the meaning. So how I've hacked this in my own system is if I'm in the state of, oh, I'm feeling this, it must mean this, I say to myself, I'm feeling this, it could mean this. It's a simple word change, but it expands the possibility and creates room for doubt. So I'm not making conclusions. I'm offering myself suggestions because I can't quite fully stop my mind doing that, but I'm also allowing for the potential that I could be absolutely wrong. And if you've ever worked with me as a coach, you will know I say this. I prep everybody in our first session and I repeat it throughout our time together. I am absolutely happy to be wrong when I'm meaning making about someone else's life because I can't ever know. It's physiologically impossible for me to know the reality of someone else's experience. And so I meaning make for my clients as something for them to push back against sometimes. What I'm sensing is this. Does that resonate with you? And I love it when they say, actually, no, that's really not true. Because what they've done is connected to their felt sense of the reality and told me that my guesstimation was completely wide of the mark, which is great. When it comes to our own internal processing, we like to think we know we like to think we know what we're doing. We also like to think we know ourselves. And so I'll give you a proper example. So I was heading into this meeting this morning with a great guy. I've met him once. It was just a chat. We were just connecting over coffee. And I was standing out that side and I was feeling hot because it's 104 in Texas. And even though it was 9 a.m., it's still pretty darn hot. And I was feeling slightly uncomfortable. And I was feeling a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of anxiety, but I was also feeling a strange kind of sense of settledness in my own nervous system. My meaning making went to, I must be feeling settled because the work that I did in the somatic experiencing training that I've just completed this weekend has changed something about how I feel. And I was like, it could be. And then I thought, I could be feeling so settled because something shifted with the work that I'm doing with my coach. Could be. Or I could be feeling so settled because I'm actually not threatened by this person. Could be. I have no idea why I was feeling settled. I have no idea. The meeting went great, by the way. But for me, those moments outside were just connecting to myself in the porch of this person before I sat down with them and we had coffee and chatted. And it was a very interesting kind of navigation through that using self-awareness and possibility. And so what I'm saying about the porch is that the hygiene is just clarity on what's there, not what it means. And I think that's really important. And I didn't actually tell my client that, so I might have to help her listen to this podcast. But it's just getting clear on what's really there, not what to do with it necessarily, not what you need as an outcome, not what it really means about the person whose house it is, just what's there. And then what from what is there is required to be taken into the house that day. So that is my protocol on YouTube. I'm putting that in inverted commas. That's my kind of movement through emotional hygiene. And starting to think about how we communicate with other people in a slightly different, slightly clearer way. And I say clearer and not cleaner because I really do want to emphasize that sometimes I'm really emotionally dysregulated with other people in real life. And I know the people I can do that with, where there is a sense of safety within that messiness. But I also know that when I do that, I don't make it about them. It's about me. My emotional dysregulation is always about me. And that is an interesting point to just conclude with. The porch may be attached to someone else's house, but everything in the porch is where your stuff resides, not theirs. So it's like these people have porches specially for you. And this is your specific porch where all of your stuff gets to live and gets to be brought into the house should you wish to. But the porch is your responsibility and it's your area where you get to own that everything inside there is yours. And when you do that and you stop making so much meaning of everything, you get to work out what it actually does mean. You get to have conversations where you can very lucratively explore what's beneath the sensations that are arising in you and the person who owns the house. So, a slightly different episode today. I'm not going to keep going because I could go on and on and on this analogy, but I'm not going to. What I am actually going to do right now is segue onto a few updates, because I've decided to put updates at the end of our Unveiled podcast for two reasons. One, I'm starting to bring on so many more guests, and guests don't always want the Unveil updates. They just want to listen. Sorry. People listening to guest episodes don't always want the Unveil updates. They just want to listen to what the guest has to say, which I totally get, and do the same to other people's podcasts. And the other thing is that maybe even people who are listening, who just listen to the Unveil podcast, don't want the Unveil updates, which is cool. So from now on, there will be a moment where I segue onto Unveil updates, if there are any and they're relevant, and they will always come at the end of the episodes. So Unveil updates, there isn't that many today. The first is I have more people signed up for the course, the Unveil Academy Coach Training Certification, than I thought I was going to have. And summer school, by the time you listen to this, we will have had one of our summer school sessions, and the next one will be in a couple of weeks. The second thing is that there are huge shifts happening within Alethea, and lots of very interesting stuff coming up. So if you are at all interested in that, stay tuned to social media, because that's where stuff will happen. I have the Friday of this week, of which I'm recording this, I have introductory calls with, I think, 5 or 6 guests that are coming on the podcast, and things are starting to get different. So we are moving beyond coaching into the general world of human health, optimization, lifing, by which I mean how to live life, families, parenting, success, mindset, oh gosh, so many things. And the people that I'm bringing on to discuss these topics are world experts. I've started well. Now, I've started incredibly well with the guests that I've had on thus far, and I have started as I mean to go on. I'm just broadening the scope. And so I've got some from the medical world and kind of health healing world happening, and some from media and industry and things going on. I'm really excited about where the Unveil podcast is being taken. I'm really excited about starting summer school, because when I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 9th of August, and summer school is on Thursday, and it's so exciting. I say it's so exciting. I actually haven't planned what I'm going to talk about yet, but that's because it's Gene Keys, and that's kind of a flow system. 3 pillars of content have been filmed already for the Unveil Coach Training Certification. And it was great. And I'm so impressed with how my being seems to be creating this content. And I'm really not taking credit for it. It's like it's flowing out of me, which is super exciting. The cadence of guest me is probably going to change from this podcast. I'm probably going to put more guests, because believe it or not, I don't actually like talking to myself for 45 minutes or however long I've been recording now. Although I did spend 4 days doing that when I was recording those first 3 pillars of content. And it is the most surreal experience. You just spend hours talking at yourself. Much more guests, much more stuff coming out on social media with regards to the Alethea stuff, particularly when it comes to September. September's a huge month for us. All right, with that, my lovely dear people, work on your emotional porches. Enjoy playing with this analogy. Discuss it with your loved ones. See if it falls into the way you can communicate and be with each other slightly better. All my love, and I will speak to you again very, very soon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Unveiled podcast. Please do remember that registration is now open for the Unveiled Coach Training Certification course beginning in September of this year. If you are interested in becoming a coach, or as we like to call it, an integrative healing professional, then this is the course for you. A good bit of coach training mixed with human design and human physiology, and lots of information about being in business as a trauma-aware coach. All of the details can now be found at unveilacademy.com/launch.